Welcome back, guys, and welcome to the second stage of the offseason. The first stage was a Season 2 recap where I went over the league awards, coaching changes, retirements, and a recap of our team and individual stats, as well as the top 10 moments from Season 2. But as you can see, we do have a new head coach in Mitchell Stanley, and so heading into free agency and the draft, we will be adjusting to a new 3-4 defensive scheme, and we will also be looking to create more cap space as we are once again pretty strapped heading into this free agency period. But we're going to get right into things here with some roster moves, and during the re-sign period, we only had one negotiation, and that was with Quadri Allison, who I decided to let go. He's more of a power back and isn't really a great player as it is, and moving forward, I'm going to be looking for more of that speedy and receiving type back, so he doesn't really fit into the offense moving forward. Next up, we have Ty Sambrailo, who was released, and this was a move to create more cap space, and his release saves $4.25 million and comes with a $1 million penalty, and this really wasn't a tough decision as he's not a very good player, and I could easily find a much cheaper option to fill that backup swing tackle role. And then also being released was linebacker Elijah Lee, who was one of our free agent signings last season, and with the change to a 3-4 defense, he doesn't really fit, and his release saves us $1.8 million and only comes with a $350K penalty, so another move just to get us a little bit more wiggle room without too much of a penalty. But even with those moves, we were still pretty strapped, and the elephant in the room is obviously Matt Ryan, and he has been traded to the Los Angeles Chargers, who are now the Brooklyn Beats, along with our 4th round draft pick. In return, we get left guard Forrest Lamp, who will become an immediate starter, and he comes along with the Beats' 3rd round pick, which is number 78 overall. In looking to trade Ryan, I wanted to make sure that I got a player that would start in return, and I looked at a couple of different options that included outside linebackers, but ultimately settled on this trade, and along with getting a starter at guard, we also move up 40 spots and turn a 4th round pick into a 3rd round pick. The rough thing here is that it doesn't really free up that much cap space and comes with an enormous cap penalty, but Ryan's time had pretty much come to an end, and the Beats only had Case Keenum, who is a 69 overall at quarterback, so it gives them a solid starter for the near future. And in getting Forrest Lamp, it paves the way for the release of our current starting left guard, Jamon Brown. For the overall that he is, he had a pretty terrible contract, and his release is going to free up $6 million and also come with a penalty of $1.83 million. And then another move was placing running back Devontae Freeman on the trade block. He's a good back, but he's getting close to that point where he's going to start regressing, and he's also gone down with injuries in each of our first 2 seasons, which has kind of made him expendable. So while I don't mind keeping him, which is what will likely happen, I'd also like to see what I could maybe get for him in a trade. And speaking of trade, before we get to free agency, we have one more trade that involves free safety Ricardo Allen, who gets sent to Kansas City along with wide receiver Johnny Dixon, and in return we acquire wide receiver McCole Hardman and the Chiefs' 4th round draft pick, which is the 125th overall pick, and now gives us 10 total heading into the draft. And this was a move that I made because I felt like it made my overall roster better. I do lose Ricardo Allen, who's a starter, but the drop off to the new starter DeMonte Casey isn't too significant, and in picking up Hardman, it gives me a solid 3rd receiver to replace the exit of Mohamed Sanu. He's also a return man, and then getting a 4th rounder in addition gives me another opportunity to round out the rest of my roster. So overall, I feel pretty good about this trade. As we move to the actual free agency part of the video, I'll skim through the free agent class and go over what I'll be looking for. And despite what that says, I went into free agency with about $9 million or so in cap space. So not much, but enough to possibly go after a couple potential starters to help with the move to the 3-4 defense and maybe plug some holes so we can make the most of our 10 draft picks. But without further ado, it's time to get to our free agent class that was only 3 players, but starts with defensive end Solomon Thomas. As mentioned before, in moving to a 3-4 defense, I have to get some players that fit into that scheme, and Thomas comes over from the 49ers on a 2-year deal for just under $5 million and slots in as the starting right end up front alongside defensive tackle Grady Jarrett and left end Lorenzo McManus. Moving to the second stage of free agency, we signed up center Justin Britt to a 2-year deal worth $8.5 million. Last season, I signed Ryan Khalil, and he was always just a stopgap, and with Justin Britt, we get a 75 overall center, and along with Forrest Lamp, who we got in the trade earlier, the interior offensive line sees a pretty significant upgrade compared to last season. And then our last signing of free agency was left outside linebacker Sharif Finch. At this point, with dwindling cap space, my options were pretty limited. I really wanted to sign Samson Ebukam, but I didn't have anywhere near the cash to pull that off. But heading into the draft, outside linebacker and pass rushers are going to be a huge focus, as that's the one glaring hole when it comes to my defense right now. But now we're going to get into the signings from around the league, and we're going to start with the Patriots, who went absolutely bonkers, starting with the signing of cornerback William Jackson. If you missed last video, the Patriots lost Tom Brady, Julian Edelman, Jason McCourty, and Patrick Chung to retirement, and Jackson here signs a one-year deal and slots into a starting cornerback role opposite Stephon Gilmore. Also signing with New England on a one-year deal was Delanie Walker, who comes over from Tennessee and will take over as their starting tight end, but at 37 years old and on that one-year deal, they could again be looking to fill that hole as soon as next season. And throwing him the rock will be the reigning league MVP Mitchell Trubisky, who leads the Bears to the Super Bowl but leaves Chicago and will now try to fill the shoes of a retired Tom Brady as he signs a 4-year, $101 million contract to become the Patriots' starting quarterback. Looking to replace Patrick Chung, the Patriots also signed veteran strong safety Malcolm Jenkins away from the Eagles. Jenkins joins New England on a 2-year deal, giving them more veteran presence on defense and rounds out a still very solid secondary group. Back to the offense, the Patriots gave wide receiver Zay Jones a 3-year deal worth just under $23 million to pull him away from Buffalo, and he's going to pair up alongside N'Keal Harry and looks to help aid a receiver group that just lost Julian Edelman to retirement. And then finally wrapping up the Patriots free agent class is defensive end Derek Barnett, who signs a 3-year, $28 million deal, and at a 79 overall becomes the Patriots starting left end as they look to return to the playoffs after a 10-6 wildcard exit this past season. Moving along here, the top free agent in the class, Trent Williams, signed a 2-year, $29 million deal with the 49ers, and the 33-year-old left tackle comes over from Washington to give them a starting bookend to protect quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo. I mentioned earlier trying to sign Samson Ebukam, and he ends up going to the Vikings actually after the entire free agency period, so he only signs a 1-year deal and may end up being an option for us next offseason, but for now he goes to Minnesota. Next up here is an old friend alert as Takk McKinley signs with the New York Giants. Our former defensive end gets a 2-year deal at just over $8 million per year, which was just too rich for us, and with a scheme change, McKinley wouldn't have fit into our plans anyway, so he ends up in the Big Apple. And joining him will be cornerback Logan Ryan, who only signs a 1-year deal worth just over $7 million, and he currently slots into a starting role opposite Anthony Brown as the Giants look to bounce back from a disappointing 3-12-1 season. Earlier you saw Trent Williams go to San Francisco, and replacing him at left tackle in Washington will be free agent signing DAWKINS. Heading into his 5th season, Dawkins is a downgrade ratings-wise, but gives Washington a much younger bookend who is now signed up for the next 3 years. Ben Roethlisberger has retired, and replacing him at quarterback in Pittsburgh looks to be free agent signing Kirk Cousins. After completing his 3-year deal with Minnesota, Cousins moves on to Pittsburgh on a 1-year deal and takes control of a team that went 2-13-1 and will have the number 2 overall pick in the draft next video. Joining him in Pittsburgh will be wide receiver David Moore, who signs a 3-year deal worth $19.4 million coming over from Seattle and becomes the 3rd-rated receiver in a group that includes Juju Smith-Schuster, Taywan Taylor, and James Washington. The former Los Angeles Chargers and now Brooklyn Beats signed right end Eric Armstead to a 1-year deal worth $4.49 million, and this is a player that I strongly considered going after. I actually preferred him to Solomon Thomas, but in looking at the cost, it just made much more sense to go cheaper, which also allowed me to go after Justin Britt rather than kind of going all in on Armstead. And then we're going to wrap up here with our division rivals who were not very active in free agency. The Saints' top signing was cornerback Jalen Mills, who comes in on a 2-year deal and looks like he will be the starting corner alongside Marshawn Lattimore. And then New Orleans also signed middle linebacker Tanner Vallejo, who is only a 68 overall, but with only another 68 overall in DAWN Buchanan and 2nd-year 57 overall DeMarco Patrick at the position, Vallejo very well could actually end up in a starting role. And then the Panthers' only move was signing defensive end Anthony Zettel, who looks to serve as a backup behind Gerald McCoy. And then the Buccaneers didn't make a single free agent signing, so a pretty uneventful free agency period as far as the division goes. But that's going to wrap up the free agency portion of the offseason, and a lot of changes afoot as we continue to turn over the roster and adjust to a new scheme, as well as aging players and several cap issues. Next video is going to be the draft, and we do have 10 picks, and the draft is always a fun time, so I hope to see you guys back for that as we continue to get closer to the start of season 3. And